Hi, my name is Lindsay McClain. I'm the executive chef at Pocono Organics, and we're going to be doing a video today on making mushroom bolognese for the Rhode Island Institute. So to get started, we're going to start cutting our mushrooms. As you can see here, we have some of our mushroom grow kits. So we sell these here at Pocono Organics. They're regenerative organic mushrooms, and we grow oyster mushrooms, maitake mushrooms, and lion's mane mushrooms. So it's a super exciting project that we have here, and I really like to utilize these mushrooms a lot because they have really great meaty flavor. So they're really great for this bolognese because people like myself that like to eat beef bolognese don't notice that there's no beef in this recipe. So to get started, we're going to cut our mushrooms, and then we're going to start cutting our vegetables. We're going to start with the mushrooms and start searing them while we cut our vegetables because we want to cook all of the water out of the mushrooms. A lot of times people say, oh, I don't really like mushrooms, and it's because they're used to pizza shop boiled mushrooms that come in a can. So that's why we want to really cook this water out so you don't get that texture that's kind of watery that you can get with mushrooms. So these ones here are our blue oysters. As you can see, that's what's right here, and that is them starting to pin. So that's what happens when they first start growing. These are our Italian oysters here. So they look a little bit different, but they both have really great flavor. So we're just going to cut them off of the root. And then we're going to dice them up so that they kind of look a little bit like ground beef once they cook down. One thing I always stress really big here at Pocono Organics is saving all your vegetable scraps for stock. So at my house, I keep a Ziploc bag in the freezer, and all of these good little scraps go into my Ziploc bag, and once it's full, then I put it on the stove to make stock. So we're just gonna slice these nice and thin, and then come back and slice them across to make a nice little dice. And then these are gonna cook down really nice. And once the sauce is finished, it will be hard to tell that there's no meat in this sauce. The one thing I like about using the mushrooms over meat is it cooks a lot faster. A lot of times the meat takes a little bit more time for the flavors to develop, but these mushrooms are so flavorful, it takes almost no time at all. So if you're looking for something that's fast, this can be a pretty fast bolognese. So I'm just about halfway through my mushrooms, and I'm actually going to turn my pan on and start letting it get hot. That way when my mushrooms are done cutting, my pan's ready to go. So we want to make sure that our pan is nice and hot when we add these, because if it's not, then they're just going to steam. And the entire time we're cooking this recipe, we're going to be fighting to catch up for the pan to get the temperature that we need it. So I'm going to add my olive oil. I want it to be moving around really loosely. And you can see those ribbons that it's giving me across the pan. That means that the oil is nice and hot. So this is the perfect temperature for us to add our mushrooms. So I'm going to bring the whole board over. And I'm just going to turn that down a little bit because I'm going to be cutting while these are searing. Now, if you're doing this at home, and like most of you will be, and you're not as fast at cutting things. I've been cooking for a long time, so I'm pretty fast with a knife. Then I suggest that you have everything cut before you get started. So again, I'm going to save these scraps for my stock. One thing I always like to show people is the proper way to cut an onion. So you're going to hold the onion with the heel of your hand. If you slip, then you're just going to give yourself a little nick here rather than taking off a finger. And we're just going to come in and cut almost to the end of the onion. Then we're going to come across and make some slices almost to the end of the onion again. Then we're going to turn the onion one more time, and we're going to get a nice dice. You want all of your vegetables to be cut the same way or the same size because that helps them all cook more evenly. Plus we want to have a nice small dice, that way we get all the flavors on the fork with each bite. Next we're going to cut our celery, and I'm just going to cut this down the middle once or twice. and then come across to get some nice even dice. If there's leaves on your celery, you can leave them. The leaves have great flavor. A lot of times I see people throw those away, but there's nothing wrong with having those in your sauces. And then the last thing we're gonna cut is our carrot. Carrots are often difficult to cut because they roll around. So anytime you have something that's round, I always recommend for people to make it flat. So that's what we're gonna do here. And then come through and give it a nice little dice. And I cut all of these vegetables pretty much about the same size as I cut the mushrooms. All right, so let's see how those mushrooms are doing. You can turn it back up now that it has my full attention. We're gonna add some thyme and rosemary. I'm super lazy when it comes to herbs, so I throw the whole thing in there and then I just pick out the stem when I'm finished. So we're gonna let these cook just a little bit more before we add our vegetables. You can see they're just starting to get aromatic and release some of their liquid. And we wanna cook that liquid out before we add our other vegetables. So while we wait for that, I'm gonna cut up our garlic. We've got 2 cloves of garlic here. And I'm just gonna do a nice little slice on that garlic. Okay, so back to this pan. One thing that I really noticed when I came here to Pocono Organics and started using some of our produce was the rosemary. And I like to talk about it a lot because it's, I think, one of the things I noticed the difference with the most between conventional rosemary and organic rosemary. Our rosemary is so sappy and the flavors are so strong, it actually makes my fingers sticky. So if I'm doing a big project with rosemary, I'll make sure to wear gloves. Otherwise, I end up like Clark Griswold and I can't touch anything without it sticking to me. So these mushrooms are just starting to stick to the pan. That's a good sign. This is creating fond in our pan. So fond is French for foundation, and it's the foundation of a sauce. So sometimes, I know my mom does this a lot. Something will stick to the pan and then she thinks it's burning. But this is actually caramelizing on the bottom of the pan and giving us lots of flavor for our sauce. We have some red wine in this recipe, and when we add that red wine to this pan, it's gonna scrape up all that fond and put all those flavors right into our bolognese. So now that they're starting to stick a little bit, I'm gonna add our other vegetables. And we're gonna cook this until they start to sweat. So what sweat means is the same thing that it means for you and I. Our vegetables are going to, they're gonna get hot and they're gonna start to release a smell and some liquid, just like us. So you always wanna look for that. So once you can start to smell those onions and carrots, then your vegetables are starting to sweat. Some of the leaves are going to start to come off from all this agitation, and that's a lot easier than me picking all the leaves off. The mushrooms and the other fond that's developing in the pan, that's exactly what we want. So some of these onions are starting to get translucent. You can see our garlic is starting to get translucent. That's the direction we want to be in for all of this. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna add to our pan is our red wine. I wanna let those vegetables cook just a little bit longer before we start adding the wine. But I'd like to talk about some of the seasoning. So we have salt, pepper, and fennel seed in this. I like to add fennel seed to a lot of my vegetarian pasta recipes because that's a very big flavor in Italian sausage. So I think it helps bring out that memory of meat in your mind, but it's just enough so that you're not tasting like an overwhelming amount of fennel. Just a little bit to make you think like, what is that in that sauce that helps make this so meaty? So now that our vegetables are sweating and some of that liquid's coming out, we're gonna add these seasonings. You can see that caramelization on the bottom of the pan. When I add this red wine, it's gonna scrape all that off. So when I add the red wine, I'm gonna turn the flame off. Add my wine. And then really scrape the bottom of the pan before turning it back on. You can see all of that's coming up. That's great. So we want to let that wine kind of cook out. That's called au sec in French cooking. And that means just until it's dry. And you can see that that wine just completely cleaned up the bottom of that pan and put all that fond and that flavor into our sauce. So this is just about dry. We're going to add our tomatoes. I like to use San Marzano plum tomatoes. They're a little bit sweeter and they've just got great flavor. And I like the plum tomatoes. Just break them up a little bit when you put them in. And we're going to cook this now on low. So while we have that cooking, I'm going to start our pasta. We're using a Mafaldi pasta. I like Mafaldi for a recipe like this because it has these ridges all along the pasta. So it's kind of like a linguine with ridges. Linguine would be fine for this. If you're looking for a short noodle, I would use maybe a rigatoni. You want to use something that can hold all these good flavors. And I always use a timer when I cook pasta. So pasta will always have a recommended cooking time on the box. There's nothing wrong with using timers. I don't like to stand over the pot and taste and taste and taste for the whole 7 minutes. So this pasta takes 7 minutes. We're just going to set a timer when we drop it in, and when it's ready, our sauce will be nice and close. So we've got this pasta cooking in some nice salted boiling water. You want your water to taste salty like the ocean. It's the only time that we get to season the pasta, and pasta recipes do not have salt in them. So if you don't season it here, then your whole dish is going to taste bland the whole time that there's nothing that you can do to add salt once the pasta is cooked. This is the only time that you can add your salt. So I've got that nice salted boiling water. We're going to come back to our sauce. And I just keep breaking up these tomatoes. I like a few chunks of the tomatoes in there, but we want to make sure they're bite-sized. That way you can get everything on your fork at once. If you wanted to keep this recipe vegan, then you could use coconut milk instead of heavy cream. Use the coconut milk that comes in a can because that has that nice coconut fat in it. Just make sure you don't buy the one that's for pina coladas. Okay, so we're just going to let that reduce a little bit. The last few things that we have is our heavy cream, which is going to bring the richness into our sauce, and then just a little bit of balsamic vinaigrette. What that balsamic vinegar is going to do is it's going to add an acid to the sauce and bring out some of those flavors just a little bit more. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left on our pasta, so now I'm going to add our heavy cream. That way it has a few minutes just to kind of cook down and get mixed in with all those other ingredients. And you can see that heavy cream really brought this sauce together. The organic cream that we use here at Pocono Organics is from a farm right in New York, and it all comes with this big fat cap on the top of it. I never experienced cream and butter and milk that had a fat cap on it until I came here and started working with local farmers, and I love it. We had our coffee training and the milk had that fat cap, and the company that came to train us for our coffee, the milk broke when they steamed it because they weren't used to using such high fat milk, and they were mortified, but I secretly loved it because of the fat in there. And it's good fats for you. It's great. When the animals are treated right, everything else falls into place. And I'm just going to add that little bit of balsamic vinegar, and like I said, that's just about a tablespoon, and it's just going to bring out all those flavors really nicely. So a nice balanced recipe has fat, salt, acid, and heat. That's how we're cooking it. So you want to make sure you're hitting all those elements. And our pasta is just about done, so I'm going to pull our sprig of rosemary and thyme. If your sauce seems like, this sauce is a great consistency, but if your sauce seems like it's a little bit too thick, your pasta water is a great way to help thin that out without watering down your sauce. So your pasta water is full of starch, it's full of salt, and you can always keep that on hand. Whenever I make pasta at home, I always keep a coffee mug of pasta water until we're finished with our meal. That way, in case something happens and I need to add pasta water to my sauce, I have it available. All right, so we're gonna pull that pasta out and put it right into the sauce. All right, we got everything in there. You can already see how quickly and nicely it's really sticking to those noodles. I can really smell that fennel now that it's all come together. This is a recipe that I've made for 1 or 2 Rodale events. I know we always try and make sure we have vegan recipes and vegetarian options available for everybody at the events. And this has been really popular. The last time I made it, I did it with a sweet potato gnocchi. And that's it. We have our mushroom bolognese. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and come on down to Pocono Organics and try some of our oyster mushrooms.